All right, so today I've got a little tutorial. It's going to review your assessment coming up today, which is over the sinners at the hands of an angry God and the minister's black veil. Let's start with the first story that we read, which was sinners at the hands of an angry God. And remember that it is a sermon, and it is an oratory sermon spoken by a minister. And his message, his main idea, is that basically people are, well, there's nothing people can do to save themselves from the terrible punishments that await them for the sins that they've committed by God himself. And that's kind of the message that he's trying to scare people into doing. Edwards, who is the actual author or writer of this sermon, his purpose itself is to encourage people to seek praise and glory to God, because by praising and glorifying him and representing him, they can find their way possibly to heaven. The only thing that can protect people from the miseries of hell is God himself. They can do whatever they want. They can try to do all charitable works and that kind of stuff. But in the end, it all comes down to what God wills, and that's kind of his message. God's attitude towards sinner basically is he's unmerciful. He will absolutely strike down anybody who is a sinner and send them to hell without mercy. God's attitude towards a person living a good life is mercy. If they do what they're supposed to do, then he will be merciful, which, when you talk about the emotion that of God does Edward most emphasize in the sermon, is in the title, Sinners at the Hands of an Angry God. And anger is the emotion God has for us right now. Now, moving over to the minister's black veil, which is a parable, not a sermon. A parable, remember, is it's a story that teaches a moral lesson. The Bible is full of them. And the parishioners in this have an intense response when seeing the minister's veil. And their response basically is frightened. I mean, they're scared. They're frightened by what this veil is or what it could represent. They don't necessarily know why, but they just have that fearful instinct. Which goes to show you that the Puritan attitude toward human nature ultimately is they feel that people are bad for the most part, or that they sin, so therefore they're very pessimistic. They're pessimists. They're not always looking on the bright side of things. They are always negative in many regards. What you can infer about the beliefs of the minister and the congregation, it's like when he was praying and the veil was heavily laid upon him, did he seek to hide it from the dread being whom he was addressing, which was God? Was he attempting to hide his sins from God, is what they were talking about. And this emotion shows that Puritans, even the minister themselves, they fear God. They're taught to fear God. That is their role. One meaning of Hooper's veil, like in his relationship between people, even though it's never completely clear, in what we can infer about Elizabeth then, is when she asks him to remove the veil, is she doesn't understand the reason for him wearing it. That's why she wants him to remove it, not for any other reason. And she ends up leaving him. However, at the very end of the story, the one person who ends up taking care of Mr. Hooper when he's dying is Elizabeth. The moral lesson to this particular story, which is a parable, is that, well, guilty secrets separate us from one another, but ultimately it is the sin and the guilt that keeps us from ever knowing each other. And the social lesson, one that we learn about out in public, is that people ultimately they protect their personal privacy by wearing masks so that other people don't ever really get to know them. And that's primarily kind of how they function or how they operate. For members of his church, when they first see him, the quote is, an unsought pathos came hand in hand with awe. How did these people feel about him? Well, initially they thought that he was getting kind of crazy and that something was terribly wrong with him. Over what group does the veiled minister seem to have the most power? His congregation, of course. His congregation grows and respects what he says. They come to hear him because he represents that which he is preaching. And the central theme of the story is that people with faith can overcome any hardship. Mr. Hooper had extreme faith, and even though he chose a path that led to isolation, one where he was kicked out of all the social norms and he spent that time alone, his faith sustained him, and in the end he was satisfied, and it is inferred that he went to a better place with a clear conscience. The message about human nature, though, which is definitely conveyed in Elizabeth nursing Mr. Hooper on his deathbed, is that love for someone, it definitely endures despite what that person does. And so even though they've been apart, even though they've been not married, she still loved him, and she still showed that. Finally, what message might be conveyed by the veiled minister at the wedding? He wants them to know that marriages are very difficult. And that's a social norm for all people, is that just because you get married doesn't mean that you're going to run off in bliss. There are going to be hard times. There's going to be controversy. There's going to be differences of opinion. There's going to be times where each of the bride or the groom hurt each other emotionally in some way because of whatever the situation is. Ultimately, in order to make it work, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be hard, and it's going to be a lot of work. And he wants to remind them of that. In this parable, the black veil itself essentially is secret sin. We all have it. All right, so good luck with your assessment. When you are done, go to Google Classroom, and there is a new assignment that we are going to be engaging in that we will start today, but by no means finish. And it is a web quest that we are going to do, which will introduce our new topic, which is the crucible. And it gives us a open research background into what the crucible is, who was involved, and kind of what happened in real modern day. The story of the crucible is built off of the series of events that we're going to research. So when you're done, go ahead and open up your classroom and click on the video to watch what the web quest is and how to do it. And that's it.